just unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. There wasn't a working class party globally of any consequence that didn't send a representative to be there. You know, such was his status. There were 7,000 people marched behind the cortege, and busloads coming from all over Britain to the funeral, and then the people of Paisley lining the streets, solid flanks of them all the way along.
Although Willie Gallacher's funeral was an international phenomenon, it was not until 2016 that Renfrew Council erected this memorial cairn to him, much of the reason being the promptings of Deputy Labour leader Mike Holmes.
I find it quite incredible that it took so long for Paisley to give recognition to one of their most loved sons.
It was a cairn to mark McLean in Glasgow. The STUC didn't collect for a similar memorial for Willie Gallacher. It was only on the initiative, I think, of the council in Renfrewshire that we've now got at least something which marks Gallacher as a figure from this community and of this community, yes, which I think is absolutely right.
I have friends in America who are absolutely, they don't understand what even is a communist memorial in Britain and Scotland. It's like, yes, why?
He was a household name. He was spoken about in houses. My father was a trade unionist, and my grandfather was a trade unionist. Always voted for the Labour Party. Really admired Willie Gallacher, and he was always spoken about. We knew Willie Gallacher's name because the men would sit in chinwag and tell old tales and tell stories about Willie, and others of that era.
Willie Gallacher was undoubtedly the outstanding member of the Scottish Communist Party and amongst the most leading figures nationally of the Communist Party. Founder member and was on the national executive of the party uninterrupted all his life. And unique in the sense that he never lost favour.
However, there's little doubt that many of the current generation passing this monument don't really know much about Willie Gallacher. The filmmakers read Willie Gallacher's memoirs and realised there was a lot more to this man than simply being a member of the Communist Party. In 2015, Paisley Library held an exhibition and speakers evening to celebrate the anniversary of Willie Gallacher's death. The library seems a good place to start any research. A bust from Stalin, cards from Beijing, Freedom Medal from Slovenia, poverty, to being an MP, a Burns lover, a working class hero, jailed for his beliefs, a founder member of the Communist Party of Britain. This fellow needs a lot more research. On Christmas Day 1881, Willie Gallacher was born here at number 39 Backsnedden Street, now an engineering factory. At that time, the Snedden, as this whole area was called, was known as the Irish Ghetto. Here, caught between the railway and the river, immigrants settled in crowded conditions to try and make their way in the world. Willie's mother was Highland, his father was Irish. They lived in the immigrant area. Like many immigrants, they lived in one room, which had no window, and which they shared with at least 5 other people. There may even have been a lodger. There may even have been 2 lodgers. The latrines were out the back, the lavvy, and served 5 or 6 families, which may have amounted to 45 persons. At least 3 or 4 of Willie Gallacher's siblings died. Willie himself is unsure as to whether it was 3 or 4.
He grew up in a town that had been a great centre of working class militancy just 50, 60 years before, when it was a spinning and cotton weaving metropolis, where its working class had been led by radicals, and where in 1820 it had been one of the main centres of the general strike that took place intentionally in origin to be in solidarity with developments in England, but as it turned out, without the support in England, because England didn't decide at that moment to go ahead.
He came home to be with his wife, who was advanced in terms of her age for a pregnancy. For that, he was given the brand D for deserter on his back. School, Willie met a strap-happy master. He refused point blank to go back. He attended Camp Hill. When his father died, Willie was aged 7, and he took up a job to help the domestic income, carrying pails of milk for local dairy. This helped obviously develop his strength, which he was always keen to show off as a younger man to his workmates. Willie did his bit around the house domestically and insisted on making cups of tea for his mother, returning from her work, which she took up as a washerwoman. At the age of 10, Willie took up another job with a grocer, coincidentally called John McLean, and again we see his little bit of recalcitrance.
Here, Wally, come here. You need to take this.
Sure, who is it?
Mrs. McWilliams, 17 Gateside.
Gateside?
Are you deaf as well as daft? You hear what Uncle said?
Shut up, you. This is between Gallacher and me. You know where Gateside is, don't you?
Aye, but this is Tuesday.
And when does Tuesday become Thursday?
Shut up, you. I just mean that.
You just mean what?
But I don't work past 2 on a Tuesday. It's a matter of principle.
What? What does a wee boy like you know about principles?
Enough to know I'm not taking it to Gateside.
Was that right? Well, I think you better be on your way, Gallacher.
Young Willie Gallacher had fallen out with an employer. He returned home and told his mother, who was caught. She wanted to support him with his principles, but at the same time the family needed the money. Cleverly, she suggested to him that he should go back and not leave poor Mr. McLean short-handed. Willie went back, but not with a total loss of face.
Well, look what the wind blew in. The wee man of principle.
Well, well. What are you after?
You never paid me for yesterday.
What?
I left here at 1 o'clock. You never paid me.
You think you should be paid after just getting up and walking out?
You told me to go.
You've got the cheek of the devil in you, Willie Gallacher. You really have.
Ah, you are the devil.
You're just lucky I haven't been out looking for somebody else to take your place. Right enough. You do know the shop and the area. I suppose you'll be wanting your job back.
Of course I do.
Right, well, get to work then, and I'll have no more of your back chat.
Like many of the alienated working class, Willie Gallacher's father sought some sort of solace in alcohol and became an alcoholic. Not violent, but nonetheless creating all the poverty problems that usually go along with working class alcoholism. This unfortunate disease passed on to his older brother Matthew, who likewise was an alcoholic, much to the sadness of his mother.
I'm looking for my big brother.
He's a big brother.
That's Decency Gallacher's boy.
Oh, so you must be the youngest boy. Gallacher the baker. God they help me. God rest his soul.
You better get away before the man comes.
As a boy, Willie saw drunken people being thrown into barrows and wheeled away to goodness knows where by the local police. It was no wonder that Willie joined the International Order of Good Temperance. Willie Gallacher was a keen member of the local temperance movement here in Paisley. The aspirations of the temperance movement fitted in with his own sense of fair play and integrity and disgust at how poor people were treated. It was not surprising when he made the shift from that into socialism. There can be little doubt that the temperance movement and the church provided the young Willie Gallacher with role models. He was a member of 2 church choirs. Indeed, when he later embraced atheism, he was reluctant to leave the choir attached to this handsome church here, Walnut Parish Church in Paisley. Eventually, Willie found a trade as a brass finisher, serving his time with Dalton's, a local maker of lavatorial ceramics. A remarkable thing for him to find a trade when usually it was a family member or a friend who led one by the hand into the various skills that were on offer.
Next, sign here for money. There they are, thank you. Next, sign here. Next, sign here.
You can stamp once I've checked my money, not before.
Oh no, it's you, Gallacher, the chap that takes no tips, sanctimonious Willie.
Don't talk to me about tips. What about the poor folk on that run? They need every penny they can get, just like me.
Head office should have had you jailed the way you spoke to my colleague yesterday.
Never a mention about how he spoke to me. He was lucky. If it hadn't been for they 2 police they sent for, I might have hit him. Can I have my money, please?
Against my better judgment.
Better judgment? First, it's no your money. Second, I suppose you think it's fair that if a sailor's laid up or shipwrecked that they shouldn't get any pay. From the moment the ship hits any difficulty, no pay. 2 weeks ashore, no pay.
Regulations. I haven't seen any of your shipmates complaining.
That's up to them. They know I'm right, but we were under orders, my man. We were under orders, and I'm prepared to argue the toss. Regulations or no regulations. See, done it again. That's still short.
Gallacher. Signed on the Laurentian September 1909. Disembarked.
You know that already.
Gallacher. Signed on the Laurentian Glasgow-Boston run. Laid up in Newfoundland 2 weeks. Brought back by SS Mongolia.
Without pay.
Regulations. You have 18 days, 2 shillings a day. That equals 36 shillings.
I wonder who makes these regulations.
Minus 17 shillings and 11 pence. That makes...
Hold it.
You've got to pay for your work clothes.
You've done it again. That is for me to pay you once I get my money. Your boss has told you I was to get 36 shillings and the 17 bob was to be struck off, as long as I kept the peace. As well you know it. 36 shillings, please.
I don't know how you get away with it, Gallacher.
I just simply stand up for myself. That's it. Whether people want to follow me, great. You can stamp now. Stand up for yourselves, boys! Stand up for yourselves!
Here Willie came in contact with the International Workers of the World of Scotland, the Wobblies. In 1913, Willie Gallacher married a local woman, Jean Roy, and promptly left for America, leaving Jean behind in Paisley. Why is a bit of a mystery, but there seems to have been some sort of in-law trouble. For 11 months, Willie mixed with the American Wobblies, then came home to Jean.
He spoke about her fondly when he was around Christmas in Paisley. Speaking about her fondly, he always wanted to get home that night to Jean.
Now, going back to the politics of that day, I can imagine that he was probably out most of the time, out of the house, weekends, evenings. He probably saw very, very little of his family. And she would have been the one that was, holding everything together.
And here in the Albion begins the Clyde Workers' Committee.
The right-wing character of some trade union leaders came out during the First World War when they supported the war, which Gallacher didn't, and where they formed an agreement with the government, the so-called Treasury Agreement of 1915, whereby they agreed to suspend the right to strike. It became a criminal activity unless it was officially agreed by the trade union leaders during the war, and also to suspend all defence of existing wages and conditions. They maintained a position whereby the government could go ahead and organise production to maximise output for the war effort. So, having done that, they then policed it on behalf of the government, and any action that was going to be taken to defend living standards at a time of very high inflation had to be taken by the workers themselves at rank and file level, in opposition to the trade union leaders, who would come down and attempt, obviously, to support the government in forcing workers back to work.
And well established that trade union leaders did not like workplace organisation. They wanted to run the show, and they didn't want the workers really to be involved in the decision-making process. So the great development of the trade union workplace organisation, the trade union movement in his lifetime, owes an awful lot to Willie Gallacher and many others like him, who disregarded the right-wing leadership of the labour movement and organised in the workplace.
Around 17 million working days were lost to strikes in Britain between 1915 and 1918. Miners in South Wales, engineers in Coventry, Sheffield and Manchester, and shipbuilders on Teesside, Tyneside and the Clyde.
These workplaces maybe had different trade unions, maybe had different organisation within them, but they get delegates to come from Fairfields or from Babcock's or wherever, and they would come along as delegates to the Clyde Workers' Committee and present the views of their colleagues and their comrades at their own workplaces. But they were accountable, so when they went to that Clyde Workers' Committee, if it was the case that they weren't representing the views of their members, in a number of cases people would have been removed.
It's part of the fabric, the tapestry of the struggle at that time, that we had a link between the communities and the workplaces that we've probably never quite had since.
Community unrest met industrial unrest, and for once Gallacher was not the main agitator.
Mary Barber is one of the most astounding examples of ordinary people, of women in the west of Scotland and in Glasgow, obviously, Mary Barber and Govan, who fought against the kind of men who never thought that they were supposed to be challenged, not just thought that they wouldn't be challenged by the working class or by working class women when their men were away to fight, but who never expected that that was even how it should be.
When the rent strikers appeared here at the Sheriff's Court to be sued for monies owed to the landlords, the women of Glasgow surrounded the building, 6 deep, all around this massive building. They brought their children naturally, and later the industrial workers of Glasgow turned out to support them, led in the main by Willie Gallacher. The sheriff panicked. He phoned Westminster. Lloyd George promised to freeze rents for the duration of the war.
First of all, I think rent strikes are seen as being this kind of isolated incident, this kind of almost like an outburst of rage that burned for a few months and then flickered out again. And I think that separates it from the industrial work that was going on at the same time, but it also separates it from the other activism that happened amongst women before the rent strikes and after them as well. So I think both there's a problem of isolating the rent strikes from everything else, and I think partly that's about the way the history was recorded. So the books that were written around Red Clydeside tended to focus exclusively on industrial history. They were very much coming from that kind of specialism. The autobiographies, people like Gallacher, mentioned the rent strikes, but very often they were mentioned as one part of a jigsaw, and clearly for them it wasn't the major thing of Red Clydeside. And I think to some extent perhaps really overshadowed by events in 1919 as well, when the rent strikes were seen as being perhaps a less significant event in Red Clydeside. So I think, there's lots of aspects that are overlooked in the industrial links of one of those.
Lloyd George decided to come north.
Thank you, brothers and sisters.
To a public meeting in Glasgow.
The man we're waiting for is not quite here yet, but our minister will be here soon. It's a long way for Mr. Lloyd George to travel from Westminster to Glasgow. Ladies and gentlemen, can I introduce Mr. Lloyd George? Brothers and sisters, may I introduce William Gallacher.
Thank you, brothers and sisters. I think we've upset St George. Let them take back the message that we, the people of the west of Scotland, we know our history. They have tried to use this war to raise the rents while our men are dying at the front. Well, they know better now. No Scottish factories where our workers are working alongside newly brought in American labour being paid twice as much. Yes, we will work for this war, but not as cheaper and cheaper labour. The lion of Scotland is roared, and it is time for Westminster to come up.
Londoners gather at Tower Hill to protest against conscription. There was also opposition in Scotland, inspired by the fiery speeches of trade union leader Willie Gallacher.
Thousands of our fellows have sacrificed their lives fighting against the very Prussianism they now propose to foist upon us here. Workers of the Clyde, you must prepare for action. When this loathsome enemy of freedom raises its head, you must strike, and strike to kill.
I just took it on the stride. When I was in Carlton in 1916, I was in for 12 months, and I got on very well. When the morning before I come out, the chaplain, he come to see me, and he said, "You're going out tomorrow morning?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, in a way I'm sorry," he says, "because there's no question that you've raised the moral stone of this prison."
Rulers of Britain had spectres looming over them. Karl Marx, the Irish problem. Gallacher became involved, but his advice was rejected.
The Irish, of course, from all their ghettos and all the towns and cities of Britain, were blamed for everything. At the height of the Red Clydeside, a Mr. William Hosley Gore wrote to the Prime Minister, "Mr. Gallacher of Glasgow and men like Murphy and Cassidy, all of whom have suspiciously Irish names, bear striking resemblance to Russian Bolshevik doctrinaires and recall the programme of Larkin and Connolly in Ireland. He further goes on to spread the blame a little. It looks as if the leaders, whether Jew or Irish, have this common feature. They are bent on using the results of war to overthrow the existing order of things.
Film from 1917 of one of Germany's wildest dreams coming true. Russian troops stopped fighting on the Eastern Front.
Working class boys going to kill working class boys.
At the height of the Secret Service panic about the industrial unrest that was occurring here in Red Clydeside, Willie Gallacher's home in Wells Street, Paisley, was turned over by the Secret Service while his wife was home alone. In later years, she reckoned that this traumatic experience caused the miscarriage of their only birth child. They later adopted his brother's 2 sons, each of whom did well academically, and each of whom died in war.
Our heroes found no jobs, wage cuts, price rises, austerity. Enough was enough. In Scotland, Red Clydeside demanded a 40-hour week.
40-hour a week struggle. He wanted 30 hours a week, and it was only when the Trade Council got involved that it was moved up to 40.
The extent to which we were on the precipice of a Soviet-style revolution, I think, is debatable. I'm not sure that people were at that point, but certainly the authorities feared that's the point that people were at, and I think the king was concerned that was the point that people were at. So there was a sense in which the establishment was afraid that this was a revolutionary action.
That was the big mistake that we made. We didn't go to Maryhill Barracks because the troops in Maryhill Barracks were shut in. And they brought young troops up from the north of England. If the troops in Maryhill Barracks had come out, there had been big doings in Glasgow.
Don't think Gallacher had any intent on, at that stage, in January 1919, of a Soviet-style revolution.
Willie Gallacher addressed the crowd on that day. From his position, he saw a policeman manhandling a woman who was slipping and sliding in the mud of that day. He jumped down and ran. Gallacher ran into the melee and punched a policeman. Unfortunately, that policeman was the chief commissioner. So after that, other policemen started hitting Gallacher. However, a boilermaker by the name of Neil Alexander spread his body over Gallacher's and helped save him from some of the blows.
And then, when I went back again in 1919 to the Carlton, when we come out the bus, Shinwell and I, the reception door, the chief warder and all the warders in duty were there. And the chief warder shook me by the hand and said, "Well, it's an old friend back again."
Willie's political ideas were not exactly the same as Lenin's.
Come. All right, Gallacher, my Paisley buddy. This, Willie, what's upsetting you? You know damn well what has upset me. This. Just because I don't like bourgeois parliaments, you more or less say that I'm just a child. Shall we talk about it, please? Yes. Too right we'll talk about it. And I have to warn you, I'm an old hand at this game. And I see that you made sure that every delegate had a copy of this. Okay, you're an old hand at this game. Willie. Willie, when I wrote my little book, I did not know you. And anyhow, there are comrades all over Europe who think just like you. You think all bourgeois parliaments are to be shunned, regular trade unions are to be shunned. You hold your nose. Good communists must be kept pure.
My experience on the Clyde taught me that union leaders vote for themselves and not the members.
So, what is to be done? Disengage?
We must be active. We must lead without stopping or turning the direct road to communist revolution. We must avoid reformism.
I agree with that, Comrade Gallacher. But surely we must engage with the sources of the reformism.
Corruption, more like.
Reformism, corruption, call it what you like. Surely we cannot overcome it by isolating ourselves. From Parliament, for instance.
The whole world knows that I have no regard for parliaments, nor the folk that go into them. Parliaments corrupt the people that go into them. You're wrong, Comrade Lenin.
Please, Willie. You believe that for your workers to be involved with the Labour Party and to follow their trade union leaders is the wrong way forward. I believe that you are wrong. Remember, when I say support, I mean the way a rope supports a hanging man.
I hear you, Comrade Lenin.
Comrades in Scotland want to form their own communist party. Clearly there is a lot going on. I think you should go back to Britain, Willie, and make things right. In the light of your new understanding, of course.
Sure. Well, I have the meeting with the American fellow, John Reed, so I'll be ready in a couple of days.
I want you to go tonight.
Tonight?
Tonight. It's all here.
But these are all I have.
Willie. Willie, do you admit you were wrong on the question of Parliament and affiliation?
Yes.
Will you join the Communist Party of Great Britain when you return?
Yes.
Will you do your best to persuade your Scottish comrades to join it?
Yes.
And will you become corrupt?
Of course bloody not.
Willie Gallacher kept his word. Miners, shipyard workers and dockers formed a triple alliance for mutual strike support. By 1925, matters were coming to a head. The government was extremely anxious. To nip it in the bud, they arrested the complete secretariat of the Communist Party. When the strike did occur in 1926, Gallacher, unfortunately, was in jail. It is argued that the trade unions surrendered without receiving assurances. 3,000 people were arrested or fired from their work.
"4 years later, 35, he stood and knocked the Independent or Tory out, and then for 15 years represented West Fife. So I think maybe the Clydeside and movements on the Clydeside, what was happening here, he was through here and he went to various places, mining, spoke everywhere.
Willie, when he became an MP in Westminster, and he went down one day to go in, and there was 2 nuns standing outside, and they were, talking away, and they said, "Can I help you, ladies?" And they said, "Oh, we would like to go into Westminster, but we have to be escorted by a member of Parliament." And she says, "We don't know anyone." And he said, "Well, come on, ladies." And he took the 2 nuns into Parliament.
I said one time that when you go into Westminster, it's like going to a fairyland. It's no real. And you've got to keep your feet on the ground. They all want to be lords and ladies. Surely the appreciation of the working class is more important than getting touched with a sword.
The Chair recognises William Gallacher, West Fife.
I have seen the harrowing effects of terrible poverty and suffering on the people, and I am not of a temper that takes these things lightly. The Chief Medical Officer in his last report last year drew attention to the fact that we are making no headway in maternity mortality. Where does all this trouble come from? It comes from low wages and low unemployment relief. And it's the mothers and the children who have to suffer. You may pay tribute or worship the Madonna and Child, but day after day, you are doing the Madonna and Child to death. What of defence? Have you defended the miners' families in Wales, Lancashire, the North East Coast or in Scotland? Have you defended these places? Go and look at them, which give the appearance of a country that has been devastated by the enemy. Have you defended the miners? There were over 1,000 men killed in pits last year and nearly 200,000 injured. Have you defended them? Come with me to the mining villages, and day after day you will see the terrible tragedy of the pits, the tragedy of the miners' homes. Have you defended the unemployed? On this side of the House, we represent and speak for the workers of this country, the men who toil and sweat.
So do we! So do we!
You speak for the workers?
Yes!
Speak for the workers?
Yes!
All right, we shall see. The miners make a demand. They ballot for it, and the ballot is a record. And we who speak for and on the behalf of the miners demand an increase of 2 shillings a day for the miners.
The Chair recognises the Minister of Mines.
I'm surprised that the mover of the motion did not show what had been accomplished. The greater part of his speech would have done very well 10 or 12 years ago if he was trying to convince a House of Commons totally opposed to the whole idea of pithead baths. This would bring the total by the end of 1930 up to, say, 336 baths with accommodation for some 425,000 persons. That envisages considerable acceleration. The expenditure concerns runs into rather big figures.
Is that any satisfaction to the great masses of miners that have been pleading and begging for these baths and won't see them for many years to come?
Sit down, Robbie, sit down, sit down.
Resolved that this House expresses the opinion that the Department of Mines should immediately
Here, here.
and thereby ensure that pithead baths will be established.
Yes. Oh, here, here.
Equipment of the mines of this
Wonderful. And he's not really renowned for that the way he should be now. People forget about that. But that wasn't just a good thing for miners, as Brian was saying. It was a good thing for the women. And I remember that. It's interesting how you get places. I was about 8-year-old when they opened these. I was over that, it was a Sunday. And it was amazing the amount of crowd it was here. All the women, because here the one they have to wash clothes, then they have to dry them in the house on the pulleys, which meant the youngsters were breathing in air, damp air. So it was a great thing, and certainly for the women.
Gallacher went to Spain to boost the morale of the International Brigade fighting there. He met La Pasionara and the blockade runners and was less than impressed by the so-called heroism of Ernest Hemingway.
One of the difficulties in dealing with a totalitarian government is the lack of any means of established contact with the personalities in which those hands lie the final decisions for the country. But the matter that has brought us here together today is one which even at that time was already threatening, but which I think we all hoped would find a peaceful solution before we met again. Whatever reviews or views of the honourable members may have had about Senior Mussolini in the past, I believe that everyone will welcome his gesture of being willing to work for us for peace in Europe. Careful perusal of this letter indicates certain limitations on Hitler's intentions which were not included in the memorandum, and also gives certain additional assurances. There is, for example, a definite statement that troops are not to move beyond the red line, that they are there only to preserve order, and that the plebiscite will be carried out by a free vote under no outside influence. And that Herr Hitler will abide by the result. I believe he means what he says when he states that. I sent a last letter to the Chancellor of Germany. I also sent a letter to Senior Mussolini so as to allow Senior Mussolini time to re-examine the situation and endeavour to find a peaceful solution.
Deutschland 1933, 470.000 Quadratkilometer. 6 Jahre später.
Gallacher lost his seat at the height of the Cold War in 1950, where immense efforts were made to mobilise opinion against him.
When Gallacher got me in 50, the mining villages were stunned. They couldn't even believe it. But West Glenrothes was a new town, and most of them hadn't that heritage, and that's what stopped them. As I said earlier, it called more than what's said in the call previously.
By 1950, the Cold War had really started with a vengeance, and that had inculcated an awful lot of anti-communism, including anti-communism inside the labour movement. So, I think there was the effect of that. A part of that actually was that Stalin was starting to become criticised more openly. There had been the split with the Yugoslav Communist Party away from the Soviet bloc with Tito and so on, and so there had been signs of a split within the Soviet bloc.
I doubt that to his dying day he was a confirmed Stalinist, and latterly his support for the Communist Party and the Soviet Union wouldn't be popular. But before all of that, he wasn't particularly popular because he was a real revolutionary. He was somebody who really did preach a message that we should have people from below exerting pressure on people above. And instead of that, what we have in our society, and most of the societies across the world, people from above dictating to people below and telling them, this is what you should think, this is what you should do, trust us. And Gallacher didn't.
The controversy over Stalin obviously affected Willie Gallacher too. However, the only thing one can find in his writings is that upon his return from a visit to Stalin's Moscow, his wife Jean asked him, "What's going on over there?" And Willie replied, "I don't know. There were language problems and it was difficult to find out anything." This doesn't seem the usual kind of Willie Gallacher answer. Willie loved his bowls and his friends here at Lochfield Bowling Club, even donating a cup. After his funeral, as all his political friends eulogised about Willie, quite rightly, one of his friends said, "Willie Gallacher, he was the worst bowler that Paisley ever had."
You got the feeling with Willie that part of his greatness was linked to his decency as a human being. There was a genuineness about him, and he never set himself above anybody else, despite the fact he was a legend in his own lifetime.
Willie Gallacher had access to the baubles and titles of political fame, but rejected all of that. He maintained his roots in Paisley, in his corporation house, with his companion Jean, until the day he died. In fact, he was on this bowling green playing bowls when he learned of the near death of Jean. She was dying, and he ran across the crags back to his house in Rowan Street. When he left Parliament, Willie Gallacher became an agitator, as he said he would, at different levels. He visited Moscow, Beijing, Paris, Rome, where he was evicted from the city, Genoa, where they refused to let him off the train, Prague, where they welcomed him heartily. But here at home, he was a contented Paisley Buddie, especially playing here at Lochfield Bowling Club. He entered into local disputes, speaking at factory gates, writing countless letters to the Paisley Daily Express about these local issues. He was, in short, a man who lived by, with and for all humanity.
To me, Gallacher is one of the many amazing examples of the kind of radicals that Paisley has bred, but his radicalism is something that has marks across Scotland, whether it's the Battle of George Square, where he was one of the union leaders responsible for the 40-hour week struggle, or his legacy in Fife as the last communist member of the UK Parliament. He's someone who always fought for radical change.
His life and times and adventures are the stuff of novels.
Change doesn't come from the actions of great individuals or great leaders simply. It often comes from movements. And so Gallacher understood that. He understood that to bring about change, there needed to be working class organisation. And he sought to build that up, first of all, through the trade unions, and then through the Communist Party, and then as a Member of Parliament. He was somebody who I think was a Member of Parliament without ever succumbing to the lifestyle of a parliamentarian. I think he kept his roots in his community here, represented the mining communities of West Fife and kept his political compass absolutely clear. Tony Benn talks about the difference between politicians. Some are weathercocks who blow with the wind, and some are signposts who've got a clear set of principles that they stick to. And Willie Gallacher is certainly one of Tony Benn's signposts.
When he lost his seat at the height of the Cold War in 1950, where immense efforts were made to mobilise opinion against him, he said, "I was an agitator before I became an MP, I was an agitator while I was an MP, and I will become an agitator now I am no longer an MP." And that is what he continued to do.
I dreamed I saw Joe here last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. In Salt Lake City, Joe, says I, him standing by my bed. They framed you on a murder charge, says Joe, but I ain't dead. Says Joe, but I ain't dead. The copper bosses killed you, Joe. They shot you, Joe, says I. Takes more than guns to kill a man, says Joe, I didn't die. Says Joe, I didn't die. And standing there as big as life, and smiling with his eyes, says Joe, what they can never kill, went on to organize, went on to organize. From San Diego up to Maine, in every mine and mill, where workers strike and organize, it's there you'll find your hill. It's there you'll find your hill. I dreamed I saw Joe here last night, alive as you and me. Says I, but Joe, you're 10 years dead. I never died, says he. I never died, says he. I never died, says he.
I still speak at factory gates, at public halls, or anywhere where a meeting is organised.
Thank you, Willie Gallacher.